Hello, this is Marzano's Classroom Instruction That Works, and the first focus is learning objectives. And as you know, Mrs. Lassiter included Marzano in the SIP plan this year because she wants us to return back to basics with research-based teaching practices that work for students. So, the first thing that was done in the presentation is we asked the staff members to think of what comes to mind when you hear the word objective. So as you see this word, what comes to mind for you? Okay. Our first objective for this presentation is to articulate a clear definition of student objectives and their relevance in the learning environment. The second one is analyze the effectiveness of appropriate and leveled objectives that promote student motivation, engagement, and content knowledge. And the third is reflect on current instructional practices, utilizing objectives and modify appropriately to ensure that all students are receiving equitable instructional outlines across all curricular areas. So the next thing we asked staff to do after presenting those three objectives was to show fist to 5, 0 being nothing, 1 I don't understand at all the way to 5 I can explain it to someone else, based on the objectives that you just saw. All right, and so most people at the preliminary stage either did 0s, 1s, or 2s. Okay, now here is an example of a teacher who utilizes student objectives and also provides feedback and creates relevant discussions around her objectives in her classroom. So we'll take a second and watch that. Here we go, right here.
On the smartboard, from here on, now that we're ready to start our objectives in science, you're going to see an objective every day. The objective is one that the state of North Carolina tells me that I have to teach you and you need to learn. All right, so look at the objective that's in green that says 6.P.2.1 and read it in your head first. Now, when we read aloud, you have to read a little bit slower, so we can all read at the same time. Now, y'all read it to me, please. Go.
Recognize that matter is made up of atoms, and atoms of the same element are all alike,
but are different from the atoms of other elements. Was that kind of confusing? Yeah. Read it to me again. Recognize that matter is made up of atoms, and atoms of the same element are all alike, but are different from the atoms of other elements. Kind of confusing. Here's the good news. It's okay if it's confusing today, because we're just starting this lesson. However, next Friday-ish, you're going to take a test on this objective. Then it can't be confusing for us. Okay, look at that objective again and see if you can find 3 sciencey words in that objective. Look for them and say them in your head. 3. Okay, raise your hand if you think you have 3. Ooh, look at all those hands. Very good. 3 sciencey words. Okay, Sean, you try. Atoms, we need. That's 1. Elements, very good. 1 more. Recognize? No, we got to find one that's more sciencey. Help him out, Angel. Matter. So what are the 3? Atoms, and then what? Elements, and then matter. Those are the ones we're going to focus on this week. Now, look at the essential question here. Okay, this is our most challenging word in the essential question. First of all, see if you can find a base word or a root word in that essential, in this word right here. A base, and it's not mole, I'll tell you that. A base word or a root word? Oni. Molecule. Everybody look for molecule in here. But this word is not pronounced molecular. It's pronounced molecular. Everybody say molecular.
Molecular.
Again.
Molecular.
All right, now read me the essential question.
How is matter alike or different on the molecular level?
Good pronunciation. Does that make any sense to you? No, maybe not, but by next Friday it needs to make sense to you. Okay, so that's where we're going.
So as you can see, that was an example of one of our teachers using student objectives. Now the research behind classroom instruction, it works in terms of student objectives, is it says that setting objectives creates clarity that helps decrease anxiety about student ability to succeed, and that students build intrinsic motivation when they set personal learning objectives. And also last year, Mrs. Lassiter had the staff look at Hattie's research, and Hattie basically did research on things that increase student achievement. And student objectives, setting objectives, has an effect size of 0.61. Ideally, we want students to grow a year in the time that we have them for that year, 1 year of growth. And just by setting objectives, that is a 0.61 effect size. All right, and also teacher clarity. So what Ms. Zaytoon did with her students in clarifying the objectives and the essential question, that's a 0.75 effect size for kids. So that also is increasing as we set objectives and then define those with students, and including examples, non-examples, organization, guided practice, and assessment of student learning. That also increases our effect size. So how do you communicate the intention of each lesson, and how do you know when students are successful? All right, so classroom practice for setting objectives. This is the expectation at Rolesville. Set learning objectives that are specific but not restrictive. Communicate the learning objectives to students and parents. Connect the learning objectives to previous and future learning. Engage students in setting personal learning objectives. So we won't be able to do these here because we're not actually in the presentation, but for this portion the staff was given objectives, and they had to sort them into categories of either too general, too specific, or appropriately specific. So an example was how I showed you those objectives in the beginning and how wordy they were. That would just be too specific. If you were to write objectives like that for students, it would be too much. You would lose them in the process. So our goal would be to write appropriately specific objectives. So here they are, the original objectives revised. First one, state what student objectives are and why they are important in every classroom. Identify objectives that promote student motivation, engagement, and content knowledge. And reflect on your current use of objectives and apply today's learning to support your work in helping all students learn. Now, we also came back and did a fist to 5. And the second time when we did a fist to 5, most people were between 3 and 5, mainly 4 and 5. All right, so you guys do have a task. So by the next faculty meeting, which will be September 8th, you had to work with your PLT to create a minimum of 5 appropriately specific objectives. Now, your other PLT members, because they were here, may have already done this task and have mentioned it to you. This is just a reminder. I ended the presentation by telling a story that talks about being proactive. A group of teachers were hanging out by the river bend one afternoon. After some time, they noticed a child with his hands up screaming and looking as if he were drowning. One teacher runs to rescue the child. Suddenly, 2 more children come down the river in the same manner. Then there were more. Children were coming from everywhere, and all hands were on deck. Suddenly, one teacher walks away. Her colleagues are furious that she would leave when so many needed her help. A little while later, it appeared as if no more children were coming down the river. Exhausted, the teachers noticed their colleague reappearing. They confronted her and asked, How could you leave when we needed you the most? So many children were beginning to drown. She responded, I went to see why the children were coming down the river. It was then that I noticed that there was a gap in the bridge, and they were attempting to jump across. I simply placed a plank across the bridge so that we no longer had to save the children from drowning. So the moral is just let's not be reactive, be proactive, and start writing appropriately specific objectives, communicating these objectives to students, and allowing students to reflect. Move upstream and lay the plank. Don't let them fall through. Give them the opportunity and foundation to cross the bridge successfully. And I ended with a quote. The way to get started is to quit talking and begin doing. All right. And teachers had to reflect and complete a plus delta, and that was shared via email to all staff. Thank you.